Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. We're really looking forward to today's event. We're going to talk about Word document accessibility. If this is your first time joining, I just wanted to let you know that this event is co-hosted from the Minnesota STAR program, or Minnesota's Assistive Technology Act program, and then our wonderful partners at North Dakota. And I'll hand it over to you, Jeannie.
Yeah, I'm Jeannie Kroll from North Dakota Assistive, and we are very lucky to be partnering with Minnesota Star, and it's always a pleasure. And today we have Nick Asbury. Am I saying that right, Nick?
Yep.
All right. With us, he is from the Department of Public Instruction of North Dakota, and he is the Digital Accessibility Coordinator, and he is going to be our speaker for today. And take it away, Nick.
Hey, um, I'm Nick Asbury. I work for DPI. I'm I'm a graphic designer, but I'm also the digital accessibility coordinator. So that's those are basically my background. I worked freelance graphic design, and then I also worked in higher ed, and I worked for Pride, things like that. So what we are going to be talking about so what I do here. So I remediate documents. It's as exciting as it sounds. And we basically take your PDF like that you export from Word, and uh we make sure that it will be screen readable. So like if you're using text to speech, you will be able to have it read to you in a logical order. And that means and that all of the important content will be there, and that's what remediation, it's really just ADA compliance is. So if you hear that term, that really just means that we're fixing the document so that it's readable for everybody. And so I actually am the first person in this position, so we actually have this huge backlog. We have I think we had something like 2,000 PDFs to remediate when I walked in, and that's in addition to the ones that we do on a daily basis. And so we're really in the early days of this. I've part of the reason I was prepared to do this was because I had to write up the documentation for it, and so each of you can have access to our lovely packet to uh, walk you through this and other digital accessibility basics. So if we're ready to get started, so let's see. Okay. So goals for this presentation, I really just want to cover the basics with you folks. I want to have it so that you can kind of envision at the beginning of a project what the finished product will look like and what accessibility is, so that you're not intimidated by it, because I find that that's one of the things that really holds people back, is that they think, oh, well, I don't know anything. I don't know enough about how to make this accessible, so I shouldn't try and I should just leave it to someone else. And then, oops, there's no one else. Most departments that are not DPI within the state just don't have a ADA compliance person for anything digital. And so what here, the secret's out. You can just make your document pretty much compliant, and pretty much is pretty good. We, with, we'll get to this at the end, but um, like having your document be fully compliant is kind of like a little bit elusive. Like there are going to be times where you just have a document that it's a little bit ambiguous whether or not it's totally compliant, even if you've run it through something like Common Look, which is a compliance software that we use. But really, like the you are not alone. Your teammate is the person with the screen reader who has used their screen reader plenty of times and can back up and rewind and fast forward and jump around and things like that. And so you don't have to be perfect, but you have to give them something to work with. And then I'm going to also talk to you folks a little bit about what I like, my favorite concept in it, which is curb cut effects, where we have a bonus effect making it easier for other people to use the document just because you made it compliant. And so curb cuts are those wheelchair ramps on the sidewalk that if you've ever tried to push a shopping cart or a stroller or ride a skateboard, those are very helpful for you too, even though they're not meant for that. Same thing with, say, like automatic doors, right? Like yes, they're for people in a wheelchair or with limited mobility, but if you're holding a bunch of boxes, having them open for you, also great. And so likewise with digital accessibility, if you make it accessible for everybody, that makes everyone's life a lot easier. For example, if you have a giant screenshot of text in your document, no one can copy and paste that, and no one can search that. And so effectively, that is just a big block in your document. And it will sometimes even be difficult to read because like it'll get downgraded when it gets turned into a PDF. So we like to make those sorts of things text when we're making documents accessible, which sometimes means retyping them, which is a lot harder than it would have been if we just copied and pasted them in the first place. Hence why we're putting so much emphasis on doing things beforehand. So what makes a document accessible? When all the users of that document get the same information, that's accessible. You've done it. So how they get that information doesn't really matter. That's all we have to do is ensure that they can get an equivalent experience, not an identical one, for ADA compliance, like legally. Like that's our obligation. So to accomplish that goal, we have to think a little bit ahead and think logically about like, okay, what is this document like text wise? Like if I ignore all the pictures, what is it like? If I, are the colors too close together, the foreground and background colors, like we talked about with last session's PowerPoint seminar, where we said, if you're having pink on pink, good luck having anyone read it, let alone someone with low vision. So no technology can do this for you. This is a question that comes up a fair bit. People are just kind of curious, like, well, can't we just have the technology run for us and it'll make the document compliant, it'll spit out a compliant document? There are some tools that are really great. Word, Acrobat, and various other programs also all have ways to do an accessibility check that is as smart as spell check. And you all know how spell check is not as smart as a person. And so you have to still know the concepts behind it, which is why we're going to be talking a lot more about concepts in this seminar than about practice, because that's going to vary based on what platform you're in, and you can Google individual things like how do I add alt text if you forget. But we're going to talk about concepts here. So no checklist is perfect either. It's really just common sense, which is again why we have not just got an AI bot just doing this. Job security. Let's see. So examples of issues. So like I talked about, text inside a screenshot. That's a really, really common one, happens quite a bit. People will try to be helpful and say like, here's this page and there you go. This is the page you're on. And as you can see, here are all the headings, and you don't say what they are in text. And so someone using a screen reader will just generally not know it's there. Some of the fancier new screen reader apps will attempt to read it and fail really badly a lot of the time because it's a low resolution scan or screenshot a lot of the time, and they need it to be a really, really crisp, clear image in order to do OCR, optical character recognition, on it to get the text out of it. Another thing that comes up is long sections of repeated or unneeded info, because when you are using a screen reader, you will not have the ability to instantly visually see it and then skip. Like when you see the copyright page of a book, you don't stop and read it. But if you were using a screen reader, you would get treated to all of the reprint information and all of the thanks and acknowledgments unless you actively skipped. Another really common error is having no title in your document. This happens a lot with really short documents where people are just like, I'm going to just start talking. And that's fine. But like, if you don't say in the document what this is, we can't tag it. Like I can change it later, but it's hard for me to add it later, that you just don't have a title on your document to say what it is. And this actually hinders use of it for people using a screen reader, because when you like effectively rewind to the top, like when you jump back to the top, you sometimes think that the document might have gotten cut off or it's not loading right or something like that because there is no title for you to find. And if you are jumping between different things, you won't immediately know what you're in if you have multiple documents open or multiple tabs on your browser. So titles are important, even if they're, and it, even if it's obvious to you what this document is, just imagine that you're printing it out, what it would be. It's not good enough to have it just in the name of the file. And then another one is no headings. So headings, you can manually make them, right? Like you can manually say like this section has a heading and I'm bolding it and I'm making it bigger. If you'd use the heading tool in Microsoft Word, it actually makes it into a heading that will be recognized by all screen readers that says, I can jump from section 1 to 2 to 3 to 4, and you can jump to the one you need to get to. That one is really like the bonus. If you can get that one, like awesome, because like I get it that not every document is going to even have headings. Like it's sometimes you're just going to have a document that's essentially a memo or a letter. That's okay. Like if it's just then you don't need to have headings. But if you're going to have anything that is broken down into sections, it's really useful to do it that way, because then you're effectively giving them a table of contents, whether or not you make a table of contents. All right. So now we're going to talk about how to actually write an accessible document. So what I like to tell people is imagine that you have a printout of your document and you're going to, like in elementary school or middle school, read it to the group at the front of the class. What would you do? You would explain, for example, oh, this is a photo of such and such thing, or this is an illustration of this, right? Because the class wouldn't be able to see it. Someone in the back would have no way to know that that's a log cabin or something that you are doing a report on. Those are the situations in which we do alt text or captions. The difference between captions are the things that you see in newspapers and magazines under the photo. And alt text is a caption that's hidden if the image successfully showed up. If it doesn't, then you get the alt text. Screen readers rely on alt text to tell you what the image is because you can't see it. And so you can do one or the other. Some people are very ambitious and do both. I recommend that you just do a caption if you're going to do something that you would want everyone to like have information on anyway, but you don't need to have a caption on every chart when it's obvious what this is. You can just have alt text so it's not visible to everyone else and doesn't clutter up the page. And so decorative images, on the other hand, like if you just have clip art or you have like a border or you have any kind of separator that's just an image, those things can just be skipped. Like they don't need alt text. And if they show up without alt text, most screen readers will just not acknowledge them. They might say image, but usually they'll just keep going and not even acknowledge it, which is fine. But just be aware that if you have images in there and you don't do anything with them, they effectively just aren't on the radar for someone using a screen reader. Think in that classroom example how you would read lists. You'd pause as you went through the document and you'd say like this, like so I'm going to talk about this now. And then within that, I'm going to talk about this. And then you'd go back and say, okay, now we're talking about the second point. You'd pause you'd go in the list and you talk about it. And if someone asks you a question in the middle of it, you would say, oh, that actually I'm answering that later. Let's talk about it here. And then you'd rewind and go back. Those are all things that you can do with regular bullet point lists in Microsoft Word. If you're using a screen reader, you can zip around pretty effectively within a bulleted or numbered list in Microsoft Word. The only requirement on us as the people creating the document is you have to actually use the bulleted list and not just type a bullet. I'm amazed that anyone remembers the key combo for typing a bullet because I think it's like 5 characters. Yeah. But I use a Mac at home, so I'm spoiled, and it's like 2, and I'm like, oh, okay. I wonder what I traded off that I have to type 5. That's like 5 characters for me that I traded for the bullet. But if you use the actual drop down menu at the top to start your bulleted lists or numbered lists, then they're going to always be built the right way. They're going to be navigable. It'll be easier for everybody. Um, let's see. And so, honestly, like I said at the beginning, you just need to give the reader something to work with, because if you don't, they will hear, you know, bullet point, round solid bullet point, this thing, round solid bullet point, that thing, throughout your whole list because you manually typed them.
Hey, Nick, this is Amy. Can I ask you a quick question?
Sure.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but I think it's relevant right now. When do we use a bullet and when do we use numbers? Or are you covering that later?
Honestly, that's just a stylistic choice. So you will, uh, like when documents are like have like a list where things are in like a sequence, that's when I tend to use numbers. Like when it happens in that order, but when it's just a list that could happen in any order, I usually use bullets. Um, that's really mostly a formatting choice based on what your particular content is. There isn't really a standard for it, so you don't have to worry about it on that front. But keep the
Thank you.
questions coming. Yeah. Um, so and same thing in the chat. Feel free to ask questions as we go. Um, I don't know. I wasn't watching it. Do we have? Oh no.
No,
Okay,
there's
we're good.
just David says, Nick, you use a Mac at home, my brother.
Right. It's true. Like you can tell my graphic design pedigree that I'm just like, oh yeah, I just own a MacBook, and yeah, I have I come in every morning and do the wrong keyboard shortcuts for copy and paste, and yeah. So let's jump back in. So how would you treat a chart in a paper presentation? You're reading to the group, they can't see the chart, right? They can maybe see that there is one, but you would summarize. You would say, okay, so like, as you can see, the eastern part of the state has a higher population, whatever the point of your chart is. And that the alternative to that is having the info in the chart written out long form. People get kind of scared of doing this, and it's really not necessary most of the time. It's You wouldn't ever really need to say in most presentations, we had, someone in Zap use this service, and that's a dot on the chart. And then we had someone in Candu use this service, and that's on the chart. And then you just, that's not important. One of the core concepts here that I'm trying to impress upon you folks is equivalent information, not identical information. So like what you're hoping that people get out of this presentation isn't literally that every single person that remembers that, oh yeah, East Grand Forks had the number 32 by it. And like, your audience isn't going to remember that. And so thus you don't need to convey that in a caption to your like disabled audience. Like you can just say this is the point, and then if you want that information because you think it's important, you can have it in an addendum, you can have it at the end, you can have it so that it's accessible later in a separate document, and just say where it is if they're interested in that. But just because otherwise you're going to have entire sections that are just explaining like in detail a chart, and that's usually not necessary and usually going to make people want to skip. And anytime that you skip, you sometimes skip a little too much and don't notice. And so I would just say give them the basics. Let's see. Similarly, would you read an entire table of data to your people you're presenting to? Probably not. I'm friends with a lot of engineers, and I don't think even they do that to each other. And so we summarize these sorts of larger pieces of information. We just down to, what the point is. Okay, well, on average, we had a 30% drop in this, as opposed to, here, let me read you the stats for every single one. You can, again, have that information available, but it doesn't have to be in the middle of your, it doesn't have to be spelled out in the middle of your document just because you have that there. Now, remember that if you have things like an actual table in the middle of your Word document, it'll just start reading it. And so just be aware that, they can skip through that, but like it will be something that's just there and it just starts rattling it off. And if they're, I don't know, listening to it on their headphones and washing the dishes, they will have to stop and go back because they're just as likely as the rest of us to, go and water a plant while we're listening to a document, or listening to a presentation. So never use a screenshot of a table, please, for the same reason we talked about before, because it effectively just becomes a mess. Like, you can't get new information, you can't get information from it very easily, and you then have to have either put in the caption yourself, or your compliance person has to go in and like guess what you meant with it, and write up that's actually a fair amount of what I end up doing in a day. Is people send me PDFs and they have screenshots in them, and I have to read all the text around it to try to figure out what on earth they're talking about and why the screenshot's here and what it means, so that then I can summarize that and say, this screenshot, this show, this is a portion of the website where you register for this program. And yeah, it a lot of the time it would have been way faster for the person creating it to just say it, oh yeah, this is on the website, go do this. You don't even need captions for things like a screenshot of part of your website if you effectively already have that information above, below it, something like that, in the body of the text. That's totally okay. Like, that's fine. You don't need to stop and do special alt text or anything. You just need to, yeah, right. People send you a screenshot of tiny and readable text. We can't edit them and make them more readable. Yeah, likewise, like we can't make it, it's hard to upscale an image once it has been shrunken down. But yeah, if you have that information elsewhere in the document, especially if it's right by it, it doesn't really matter that you had a screenshot there, because then it's just icing on the cake. But if a person couldn't figure it out without that screenshot, you should add something. You should throw them a bone, because otherwise they're just gonna be like, and did I miss part of this document? Do I just not get to fill out that step? And yeah, and so, and this again, curb cut effect. If you do this, it means that everybody can get that same information just as easily. You don't have to squint at some pixely little tiny image. All right, and next here, there we go. Do you have bold, italics, or other formatting that conveys information? I don't mean that it just is there to emphasize something. That's totally cool. That's fine. You can have all the italics and bold and underline that you want. The thing to watch out for is having that be the only way that information is conveyed, which is a little bit unintuitive to us as sighted people, where we're going to just say, oh yeah, like, I underlined in this list all the schools that are participating in this program. And, well, cool, but a screen reader app isn't going to say underline text, this. It basically ever. I've never seen one that does it. And so you effectively did not convey that information. What you should be doing instead is saying, even just an asterisk. I put an asterisk by the ones that have participated in this program. Or, say that information and then like emphasize it with this. So like, you will need to fill out form such and such, such and such, and such and such, and the names of the forms are bold. That's fine. That's great. That's good communication. But to a person with a screen reader, they'll get that same information, even though they won't get the bold. Like, that's fine. Um, let's see. Similarly, if documents have links, again, links are great. Put links in your documents. But be aware that if you have a document that's got a link in it, it's going to, and it doesn't say, Department of Public Instruction or like DPI.nd.gov or nd.gov/DPI, it's going to read you http://www.nd.gov/DPI, and that's a really short URL. We encounter much longer URLs in a day, and so use the built-in embedded link feature. It almost always automatically does it in Word, and if it doesn't, you can go to the link button and highlight text and put a link in it. This means that it will, for the user who's using a screen reader, it'll just read that, and it might say link as it goes, and that's totally fine. Like, and they can navigate, they can tab between the links. Like, life is easy. But if they have to sit through a long link, and a fairly long link can take about as long as a page to read, and so they'll just be sitting there for a solid minute getting a whole big string of gibberish. And actually, they're probably cranked up in speed. They probably listen to it way faster than I do, so it's still about a half a page. But like, they're going to just be getting blah 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 blah, a bunch of jumbled numbers and letters. So please use the link text feature. So we can take a quick look at the packet that we included with the presentation if you folks would like, or if we have questions, we could jump to the Q&A and do that part second. Does anyone have questions on the concepts we covered and the basic techniques that we talked about? Amy, Jeannie, do you guys have anything while we wait?
The handout will be coming at the end, so they don't have that. So if you wanted to share,
we'll run through it. So we're sending you folks a handout that let's see here. Yeah, so essentially it's a handout on how internal to Department of Public Instruction we train people on digital accessibility. It just covers a lot of the stuff we covered in here, just in more detail. And then it also covers how we would make like an audio or video presentation accessible. You guys can come back to the sequel to this, and I will be talking about video. And it also breaks it down by other types of disability. So like, if you had limited mobility, if you had if you were, colorblind, or if you had hearing impairment, like how do we think about those sorts of accessibility issues, and like, how do we just build that into the process? Because honestly, if you make this not a huge, like, if you do this early enough in the process, it's actually really easy, because you're just designing it in from the get-go. And it's like thinking of, before you write up the document, are people going to print this, right? Do I need to do any, can I have things outside the margins? Can I have whatever, how small can I make the text? If you're never going to print it, a lot of those questions don't matter, but you needed to know that up front. And so, yeah, like, it basically just, I'm sharing the document so that you folks have a reference to this a year from now, so that, because if you're not me and you don't do this every day, you will forget. And that's okay. You need that brain space for other stuff. It also has a list of a glossary at the end of different terms. So if you hear something that's like, oh, what is OCR, or what is a section 504, or what is, what are the standards that we use? What is remediation? Those are all just listed in the glossary at the end. Okay. So let's see here. And then, now if we jump into, there we go. Did we have some questions here? What do you do with links in documents that are used electronically as well as printed? URLs are needed for printed copies. So again, like we have to kind of put it on our thinking caps because there isn't really a standard way to do this. What I usually recommend to people is that they have like a citation to a footnote for a link if they're going to write it out, if it's really, really long. If the link is, you know, like only half a line long or less, I would just put it in at that point in its full written form. Um, if you can shorten it a little bit by dropping the, https www dot, then you could, like, you're not going to write like all that stuff and then ebay.com. Like, remember when we always did that for everything? You'd see like a van drive by and it would say like, go to http slash whatever joesdiner.com, and now we just say joesdiner.com. You can, things like, start thinking about it in those terms, because, you know somebody using a screen reader is going to, and using this digitally would be totally able to just say, oh, okay, well, I'll just go type that. If it's super long, I would probably make it a footnote. I would probably just put it at the end so that they can skip it once they get to the bottom of the page. And that way, if you have multiple links on the same page, you can just skip all of them at that point if you're using a screen reader. That would be my recommendation. TinyURL and other link shorteners are great. The I think I know the state of North Dakota actually has some sort of link shortener of its very own that NDIT is implementing. I think the state of Minnesota might have something similar. If not, they probably have one they prefer. Link shorteners are, I'm sure you guys have all seen them. They're just the ones that they're like Bitly and what was it, Owly and TinyURL, and they're fine. Like, they're totally reasonable options. The only problem with them is that from a security standpoint, you have no idea where you're going. And so you're if you're putting in all these shortened links that aren't official, it's difficult for someone to know that they're legitimate, and you might get some grumbling from your IT staff. It's also more of a challenge to use them because it's easy to forget what the link is when you're copying and pasting it.
Hey,
When
Nick.
you
No,
are,
Nick. Oh, go ahead,
Sorry,
Amy.
sorry, this is Amy. I wanted to chime in on this because this is a good one. And if anybody is in the audience who knows if the state of Minnesota has a preferred link shortener available, I'd love to hear that. But one of our webinars, the advertisement, I think Tom created with I don't know if it was Bitly or Tiny, but here at the state, my security wouldn't let me use it. So
Yeah.
It
I
was
ended
you.
up,
I couldn't remember.
yeah,
I
yeah,
was
it
just
was
gonna
it
say
was
the
us.
same thing.
So what we ended up having to do then was I tried it where I just used the hyperlink, but I also did it with the whole thing typed out, which I know is naughty, but I was struggling a little bit. Also, somebody had commented, Nick, that they do two versions. I think Jen had shared that, or
yeah.
yeah,
Um,
that they do two versions when it's a print. Also, like if you're going to print it out, right?
well, and again, like, it's going to be case by case, because if there are totally going to be times where that's a really good option, where you'd have a print version and you'd have an online version, and you might even have it be set up differently in other ways too. Maybe the print version has QR codes or something in it. Um, and or it might be printed so that it can be, you know, done as a fold over booklet that your copy machine just makes for you, or it's a pamphlet. Like, those sorts of things, they're awesome. Like, that's if you are able to make a dedicated version, it's gonna be better. It's just that most of the time we're a little pressed for time, and so we're like, okay, well, how can I actually finish this and like make one version, and then update just the one version. But yeah, if you have the capability to do that, if that's something that's built into your workflow, that's always going to be better. Within Drupal, MDA can make short URLs. Yeah. people could if people don't think people could, if what was it? My director had a good point. If we don't think people could remember the link in long form, then shorten it. Yeah. And yeah, honestly, that's a good rule of thumb. If you can't remember the link, then it's probably too long. And so that also is going to depend on things like whether the link has words in it versus just a string of characters. If I said to go to nd.gov/DPI/grant applications, you could all do that. But if I said, then go to, a whole bunch of letters and numbers, we would not have a lot of success.
Hey, hey, Nick, I got another question here for you. We recently had someone reach out who had some forms that they were working on that they would be sharing with other employees within an agency, and they wanted to make sure that it was accessible. And the director kicked back because there was text that was underlined, there was text that was red, there was text that was bolded. And he said, don't use that. But then I spoke with another specialist who was like, well, that could be beneficial for some people who maybe are neurodivergent and maybe just benefit from that contrast. So, I'd love to get your feedback and your opinion. I think you alluded to it earlier, as long as it's explained. And what are your thoughts on brackets?
Okay. So let's unpack those and do them one at a time. Okay. So times where you won't be doing compliance work, if you are doing it for internal purposes, compliance doesn't really factor in. You will get told, like in this scenario, oh yeah, so and so will need it, to be accessible for a screen reader or what have you, right? But when you're going to assume that it has to be is when it's going to be public facing. When you're going to have something that, isn't an email that, or like isn't you don't have to make every email, every like flyer, every internal policy document perfectly accessible. But when it's public facing, we have no idea who's going to walk in the door. Like we have no idea who will be using the document, and we won't be available when they're doing it because who knows what time of day, and they won't be able to call us and ask. And so the only reasonable answer is to make it accessible in advance. As far as I'm trying to follow on the like exactly what happened. So like they made a document and it was relying on bold and things to give information, or it just had a bunch of it.
It just had a bunch of it. When I looked through it, I thought it was fine. And for me as someone who is sighted,
Mhm.
my eye was drawn right away to the red. They had an asterisk in front of the red. They did use some brackets, but I had recommended there were some areas where I thought maybe if they explained a little bit more and used brackets, that might help. But in this case, the supervisor did not want them to use any color, any underlining, any bolding.
I mean, I would consider that like overkill, frankly. I think that's being overly cautious. If you have formatting like that, people who are using a screen reader will not see it and it won't matter to them. People who have low vision will probably uh like it'll probably be a horse apiece. Like some of it might make it easier. Like the bold might make it easier sometimes to navigate the document and know key points. But maybe the red is difficult, or maybe some, I don't know. Like there could be other problems with it, but honestly, they're gonna be familiar with how to deal with those sorts of problems. There's lots and lots of formatted text on the internet, and everybody has their own little toolbox of tools for how they're dealing with this to overcome their particular challenge. And so I think that would be being overly cautious. I would recommend instead, honestly, to just ask the person, be like, does this work for you? Because this is the only person we have to worry about finding this to be accessible. And they'll be able to tell you right offhand. Obviously, we don't want to take up all their time doing that. So we want to follow the general guidelines before we would, if, say like, hey, if you have any difficulty with this one, let me know. And so, make sure you're doing things like we talked about, where we have documents that are, going to be uh navigable and accessible, and like there all the information is there. But I wouldn't worry too much about it. I would worry more about it being like some kooky font that no one can read. I think that would be my main concern. Does that answer that one? Okay.
Yeah, I think that's good.
Yeah. And so yeah, like, and there are times where you just won't need to have your document be like completely digitally accessible. It's just you do not need to make every email and post-it note and whatever, especially things that you're having for yourself. I've had people ask me, well, don't I need to make all of my own documents that I have for reference? Don't I need to make those accessible? And honestly, no. No one will need them. It doesn't matter. The fact that it's a public record, yes, in theory, we could be asked to somehow have to make that accessible, but like that's not immediately public facing. Like if someone did a freedom of information request and got that document that you were using to write up your workflow, um, sure, yeah, but like we would find a way to work with them in that scenario. But the workload there would be like, if we front loaded all of that and assumed that every single internal document was going to have to be accessible, it would slow our departments down way too much. And because it would happen once, every 10 years with one document. So yeah. And yeah, so I think that, you know, it's as important to stop and say like what isn't important to make accessible, because sometimes people get a little bit skittish and they think like, well, you know, I'm not going to be able to do this perfectly, so I shouldn't do it at all. So like I'm here giving you permission, like it's okay, like B's get degrees, give me something, like give me, I say this both as someone who has worked with disabled people and someone who has to fix your documents. Like give us something to work with, because, you know, everybody who uses the internet who has, like a visual disability or an auditory disability, this isn't their first rodeo. Like people do not train in on how to do this. They aren't just like, wow, I can finally go to the, Minnesota.gov. And, and that's where I'm going to try out my tablet that, reads to me as, like, especially if they're, like getting this in like elementary school, like they're not going to just be like, wow, cool, Department of Education, let's go. No, they're going to be familiarizing themselves with it in, more like fun places. Not that our websites aren't fun. But yeah, so they will be used to using their technology by the time they get to you. You just need to give them something they can work with. People with disabilities are savvy enough to know how to do this stuff. It's just that they need something.
So question for you then. Let's pretend that most of the people participating today have some experience in this, but let's say we're trainers or we're folks who are working with people who have no experience. Are there like one or two or maybe three best practices, points that you feel we should be conveying to people who this is brand new to them? This is something they've never thought about or were aware of. What are some of the 1, 2, 3s that do this, this, and this?
Right. So the ones I would say are pretty much the ones at the very, very beginning, where it was like, don't give me a big screenshot. Okay. Don't give me like anything that's just a big picture that you don't explain, that has vital information, whether that's of a chart or of a web page. Please give us titles and tell us what this document is we're working in. and and that again like helps other people too, like that helps everybody, because then they can say, oh shoot, what was this document, without having to look up and see like what it's named. um and then you know use headings so that people can navigate your document. And again, like curve cut effects, like this will help everybody. And yeah, so like those would be my key ones. Those are the ones I run into all the time, and alt text, of course. So it would be those four. Where I would say, give us, give us that much, and we can figure out the rest. So uh, screenshots, alt text, titles, and maybe headings. And if you do, and
oh, sorry,
and all of those are built into Word, and so you can do all of that,
yeah,
without any special assistive technology on your end.
No, I was just gonna say about the curve cuts, the whole screenshot thing. We get a lot of invitations in the mail as Word attachments or things like that, and it's basically a picture of whatever they made in whatever design program, and
Yeah.
all the vital information is in there. And for me as a sighted person, I can read that. But then you talk curb cuts. How am I going to get there? What do most of us do?
Yeah.
Do we want to type the whole? I don't remember the address from the Word document on my phone, which I can barely read, to get that into my MapQuest. Boy, that just dated me. And to get into maps. And I think that I've explained that to people, and it's like, oh, this is so useful. Of course, we shouldn't be doing that.
Yeah. If you're having trouble getting buy-in, that is a really good way to do it. Like, that's why I end up talking about curb cut effects. I don't think I need to sell anybody who's attending this webinar on the idea of making your document accessible. But somebody who is working in another part of your agency, who is overwhelmed and doesn't think they have time to do this, if you present it as a curb cut effect that everybody benefits from, then it's awesome. Things like, and once you start like seeing it that way, it actually makes your life better. Like, I have to listen to documents all the time with my headphones because I want to make sure they're accessible. And I also just listen to other emails. And like, if someone sends me a really long email, I'll just listen to it. And if someone, if there's like a web page that I have to read up on, I'll often just listen to it. And then I'll just be, cleaning up my downloads folder or whatever other mundane thing while I'm doing that. And it gives my eyes a break from having to just stare and read. I can even shut my eyes and just keep listening to it. I'm sure that someone in the department probably thinks I just take a nap or am meditating or something really cool, but no, I'm actually just listening to yet another document. And so once you kind of start looking for those curb cut effects, they can help you too. If you, in that same document, that handout that you folks will be getting, we actually talk about a bunch of them. Things like when you're, let's see. Yeah, so you can have, if your eyes are tired, you can have text to speech read it to you. In the video one, we're going to talk about how lots of people use closed captions who are not hard of hearing because their kids are loud, or they're, at the gym and looking at it on their phone and they wouldn't be able to hear it anyway, or they're, they want to know how to spell someone's name that isn't shown on screen, but it's in the closed captions. Things like that are really slick and are worth it. And so, it's always helpful. We talked in the planning session of this webinar about how it's really helpful to people who, like because we were talking about the previous webinar where we were like, make sure you have enough color contrast, not just for people who have a visual disability, but for everybody, because we all have to look at your slideshow. And if it's all just, seafoam green on neon green, we aren't going to know what the heck it says if the text is really small. So yeah, honestly, yeah. And then like, as far as visual, like invites and things that are made in, say, like Photoshop and are just a document. Um, you can't really rely yet on screen readers to have the ability to get text out of an image very well. You probably have seen this on your phones where it kind of guesses. And if it's like black on white text or it's kind of big, it can do it. But if it's got any kind of a background or it's any kind of font it's not expecting, it's going to really struggle with it, which is why I tend to do a fair bit of, I've shifted to doing more of my design in InDesign so that it comes out as PDF. Um, Another thing I would tell everybody, keep in mind, if you take nothing else from this, PDFs are your friend. Make things a PDF whenever you can. When graphic designers are like, what format do you want this in? Do you want it a PNG? Do you want it a JPEG? Just tell them you want a PDF, because then your text is selectable and people can copy it out and screen readers can read it and things like that. And you can copy
Hey,
it out
Nick.
when you update it.
Nick, we do have a question.
Okay.
It's a colleague asked about using a table to convey information. We tried different formats and none would flow the information in the correct order due to text wrapping. Do you have any suggestions on that?
What program was this in? Is this just in Word? I'm going to assume it was in Word.
Yeah, Debbie, if you're able to write
Yep,
in chat
okay.
if it's something other.
So, right. So when you're doing things like text wraps, sometimes you will have situations where you have to cheat and you have to put the image in the background or something behind the text, and just then when you get to the edge, you'll just have to do an ugly little like return line and break the line so that it's not going across it. I applaud you for double checking that, because that would have flown under the radar really easily. And yeah, so like I assume that you just had it read it to you out loud. Um, and so anyway, but yeah, that's how I would probably deal with that one. I would also say that once you make it, it may also read differently, like in a different order once it's a PDF, because the reading order gets redone by Adobe Acrobat. So if you're making it a PDF anyway at the end of this process, I would read that document because that's the one that they're actually going to receive. While you're like, we'll come back to that one if there's more info on it. Dyslexie font, I have used Dyslexie font. It is cool. It is, so for those of you not in the know, it's a font that is designed to be easier to read because the letters aren't symmetrical. You can't flip them in your brain very easily because they're like heavier on the bottom, like they're thicker, the lines are thicker on the bottom. It's really cool. The research is still a little ambiguous on how much it helps. Like some people swear it helps a whole lot, and some people say it doesn't help you, in my experience with it when I've worked with people with dyslexia. And so like we haven't gotten to a point, I've never seen really good info one way or the other on how much it helps. Obviously it doesn't hurt. The license is free for open dyslexic font, and I think you can get one for an agency for free for dyslexie font. My recommendation on those is I'm not going to use them anywhere until I have hard evidence that it improves readability for people with dyslexia by like 50% or something, because the graphic designers in your department, if I can put on my graphic design hat for a moment, the graphic designers within your agency will reject having to use one weird font all the time. They already have a font that they're in love with that they will want to use. And so, in the state of North Dakota, everything has to be Futura or Arial. And so we would have a tough time justifying switching to Dyslexie. This would be different if this were like course materials or something, right? Like if this were like, hey, so you found out you have dyslexia and you put it in the Dyslexie font, sure, right? But like as far as like having a blanket policy of just changing all of our documents to use Dyslexie, I would really have to see some good stats on that before I would ever make a pitch to do it in an agency, because otherwise you're just doing it and then you're fighting this huge battle to have it implement against what your current graphic design standards are in your agency, and then it may or may not actually work, and we may have a different one come out later, and I just wouldn't do it. I would wait until it, and you can experiment with it. Like if, you know, if you and for specific, like I said, specific applications, like if you're using this for like people you think might have dyslexia, go to town. Like they'll appreciate even just the like thought that you did it. You know, they'll appreciate that somebody was conscientious and tried to help, even if it only helps a little bit. Um, let's see. Can they sans serif fonts? So um North Dakota tends to use Futura and Arial because they are sans serif, just because it's a little visually less complex. Um, you can use serif fonts. Like it's not, in my experience, the end of the world. Like depending on the context, it might even be easier to read. But like, the reason that we picked those is just because they are really good in a broad selection of situations, accessibility wise. And they're really neutral. Like you could put them on something that's happy or sad or whatever. No one's gonna. It's like Helvetica. It's everywhere. There's Helvetica on our city county building in town. Um, but like the those sorts of things, I wouldn't. I would say like worry more about whether or not you are meeting your graphic design guidelines. Like talk to your graphic design person, and see if that's like compatible with what they're doing. Um, I'm sure that yeah, I can detect the thoughts from down the hall, and my boss is no doubt thinking that we need to tell you not to have 5 different fonts in your documents so that your graphic design people don't have a fit. That's the cause of most of our fits around here. There's that I'll see a document that someone did that has 5, 6 fonts on it, and just be like, why? Um, can the info on this webinar apply to any app? Yeah. Largely, this is agnostic to any application you're going to be using. You can just apply these techniques. The only thing that's going to be different is how you use a bulleted list or something. The specific like interactions with the application, but the theory is all the same. Whether you're using this in you could be using this in TextEdit, you could be using this in Notepad, you could be using this in InDesign, like whatever you're using it in, Publisher, anything like that, that's totally fine. The same principles apply. If you're making a Google Doc, whatever it is, but like these same things apply, and those all tend to have modern word processors tend to have the ability to do these things. And then if they don't, like if you made it in, say, like, there are ways to do it in InDesign, but if you just didn't because you didn't know, and then you exported it to a PDF, as soon as Acrobat opens it and tags it, because you can go to accessibility, if it's not tagged, if it's just not reading in a screen reader, or it's not because a screen reader will try to read it anyway. If it's really screwed up, you can always just open Acrobat, go to accessibility, and then auto tag it, and it'll do an okay job. So like those headings and things, like they'll still work. It'll still use them. Those are going to apply in anything you use. Let's see. Since we have state font
Hey,
standards
Nick,
already,
we are at time.
sure. Let's see. Was there anything else here? State font standards, branding, campaign to get Calibri. Yeah, right. And so like, yeah. So yeah, absolutely talk to other people in your departments and like see what the other interested parties are. But yeah, thank you guys so much for having me. I am really glad that we got to go through all these and get some really good questions, because I know that this is a perennial issue, and if we don't do it every single day, it's really sometimes hard to know where to begin. And so if we can kind of focus on just doing the basics, approaching these things like this, having some basic best practices, and just keeping it in mind, and documents will become more accessible within your department just organically. Yeah. So, and I believe we'll have a recording of this. DPI also has some videos on document and video accessibility. We can send those out with the email at the end, for you folks. Those again go over most of the same information that we went over here. Okay. Anything else from you two?
Wonderful. No, thank you so
Thank
much.
Thank you. And I just want to quickly mention we are going to be having another live webinar on accessibility for social media on April 17th, which is National Assistive Technology Awareness
Woohoo!
Day. So please
Nice.
watch for the announcement.
Yeah, it is also North Dakota as Assistive Technology Day, just announced this week, just
Woohoo.
proclaimed. Yep.
Awesome. Thank you,
Very cool.
everyone.
All right. Thanks, guys.
Have a good day.